Hi, my name's Suzanne T. Ian Hook, and in 2010 I decided to make a life-changing decision and open up my own orphanage here in Vietnam, Saigon. In 1969 I was born in the Vietnam War. My real mother is Vietnamese and my dad is a black American GI soldier. My real mother abandoned me when I was a baby, and I was found underneath a bush by a policeman and placed in the nearest orphanage in Vietnam. The war was raging in 1969, and some English nurses came over from England and started to help out in the orphanages. Now obviously I am a mixed race baby from the Vietnam War, and mixed race babies in the orphanage weren't really welcome because the American intervention in the Vietnam War was not welcomed. So a lot of the Vietnamese nurses didn't want to look after the mixed race babies, and we were always the last ones to get food and care. So the English nurses particularly looked after us mixed race children, and they sent word back to England saying that there were loads of children here that needed homes. My adopted parents came forward and offered a house and a home for a Vietnamese girl. So in 1972, I was actually flown out with the help of the British Embassy and arrived at Gatwick Airport, where I first met my adopted parents. I have lived in England ever since. And over the years, I have slowly started to look into my Vietnamese past. I am actually a qualified chef by trade, and I'm also a qualified beautician. But as I say, in 2010, I made this decision to open up this orphanage. It was something I'd never planned. It wasn't in my future, but circumstances had led me to this point. Because in 2006, I decided to come back and see Vietnam for the first time and see my country. And I came here with my husband for a 2-week holiday and fell in love with Vietnam. So 3 months later, in 2007, with my husband's blessing, I left him behind and I came and lived in Vietnam by myself. And I spent the year trying to understand the Vietnamese culture, trying to understand my past and accept it. And whilst I was here, I worked at 2 orphanages and volunteered. And in 2008, I went back home, but I made sure that every year I came back to see these children, and I supported these orphanages. But one particular orphanage I started to support. As the years went by, there were more and more children arriving at this orphanage, and the conditions were getting worse and worse. And every time I went back, it broke my heart to see how bad these conditions were. And in March 2010, I was saying goodbye to the children on my last day. And there was one particular girl called Sha, who over the last 4 or 5 years I'd got to know. Her English wasn't great, but I kind of understood what she was trying to say to me. And I was sitting with her and explaining to her that I was getting the plane the very next day back to England and that I would see her in a year's time. And she asked me not to go. And I said to her that I had to. Then she asked me to take her with me. And I explained to her that I couldn't. She then burst into tears and basically said she had nothing to live for. She'd been in this orphanage since she was 7. She wasn't going to school, she wasn't being educated, she wasn't allowed out, she had no childhood, and she was really being made to look after the other children in the orphanage. And as this girl was sitting here crying and telling me that no one loved her, no one cared about her, and that she wanted to die, because to her, what's the point in living? And it totally broke my heart, seeing this child talk this way. And even though I tried to convince her, and for 14 hours I just had her words ringing in my head. By the time I arrived at Heathrow, I had decided that I was going back to Vietnam. I was going to open up this orphanage and I was going to go back and take her and give her a future and send her to school. How I was going to do it, I didn't know. But I had decided this, and this is what I was going to do. And so for the last 4 years, I have been living in Vietnam. And in November 2010, I arrived back in Vietnam with just a suitcase and a laptop and this vision of opening up this orphanage. And I have been writing a very personal blog of how I've done this. My ups and downs, the highs and lows, the struggles, the heartache, and the sheer hard work it takes to open up an orphanage here on your own. And so once a week, I'm going to share my personal blog with you and take you on this roller coaster ride and tell you my personal fears and my emotions. And I hope you enjoy the roller coaster ride with me.